assistance and cooperation. Mayor, if you don't mind, we'll go over to the last item I have. This is a presentation on our citizen survey. You might recall last month we talked about my plans to do this at the first meeting of every month. We're going to talk about a certain particular topic of each of the citizen survey. And tonight we want to really focus on the water aspect of that survey. Again, just a reminder, we did this last December in 2024. We had just under 1,600 responses. 75% of those were city residents, with another 25% coming from the greater Boerne community. Measured all aspects of our services, different perceptions of the community. Next. You know that you can go online and actually see an interactive dashboard where you can kind of play with the different configurations of which area responded in which way. Here's just one section that rated our mobility and infrastructure, and specifically there's about 4 or 5 areas here that speak to water. If you'll advance next. You can see those here. You can see we asked them to rate our infrastructure planning efforts, not just water, but all of our utility systems. How are we actually managing our water resources? This is, again, a perspective there. And so you can see how many people rated that as important. 31% of the survey respondents said managing our water resources was important. And then you can see the dissatisfaction there at 61%. But then on the flip side, the reliability of our utility systems, and you just heard Director Mann talking about natural gas, but also electric, water, sewer. They do a great job of maintaining very complex systems with reporting requirements, testing requirements, things of that nature. And you see the importance and the satisfaction, which is actually the highest in this perspective on infrastructure. And then, of course, conservation efforts and programs. Next. One of the things we ask, and you guys know this, is at the end of the survey we ask if there's anything they want to tell us about the city, anything on their mind. And out of the nearly 1,600 respondents, 43% gave us a response. And you can see the categories in which they gave us response. Next. You can see 18% of the comments that we received actually had some sort of a water comment. And so we want to actually talk about those tonight. In fact, I'm going to ask you, each one of you, to read an example of comment that came from your district, your area. And so I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem Willison to read from his district.
We live in Shoreline Park. We are committed to conserve City Lake. We live on Boerne Lake. We don't get our water from Boerne. Odd. Why not? But you are accepting other places in town, ... It should be a no-brainer.
All right. Now I'm going to ask Councilwoman Wright for District 2.
This is a good one. Recalculate how long water will last. I don't feel it's accurate. Publicize contingency plans for running out of water.
We hear that one quite a bit. Councilman Scott, will you read your quote?
I heard quite often that resources are limited, water in particular, yet neighborhoods, one after another, are platted and permitted every year. Right across the highway from me is another several hundred unit complex about to open. All of these people will need utilities. If resources are in such short supply, why do you approve these plats and permits?
Again, another one we hear about quite a bit. District 4, that's Councilmember Bunker. He's not here. I've asked the mayor to go ahead and read this one.
Manage the growth and development. Our water resources cannot meet the current rate of growth. The current roads and infrastructure do not meet the needs of citizens and other commuters.
And then finally, District 5, Councilmember Macaluso.
Get rid of fluoride in the water.
Yeah. And then we also get comments from the greater Boerne area in our community. And so I've asked the mayor to kind of read an example of somebody who's not a resident but lives out in the county.
This is from one of our community members. Stop all the development. Our water resources can't handle all this growth. You're going to bleed the groundwater dry.
So that's kind of an example of what we'll do each month. We'll pick a topic and we'll read those some of those comments. I've asked Director Mann to kind of come up and actually speak to each of these comments, as well as give some other insight about how we manage our water resources, our water utility. He's done these presentations in the past. It's very knowledgeable, but this is going to be more tailored to our citizen survey. Director Mann.
So as you're aware, I could talk about water for hours. But in the interest of your time and anybody else that's watching, I'll be brief. I'll ask you, though, to interrupt me at any time you have questions if I'm going too fast and you need more detail. So you've seen these maps before, and so what is Boerne, the Boerne community? And so if you look on the screen, the small blue area is the city limits of Boerne. The yellow and green areas are Boerne zip codes, or in other words, zip codes, but say Boerne, Texas, in front of them. And then the white is the outline of the Boerne Independent School District. And pretty much anybody that lives in those areas would say they're from Boerne. But when we talk about water supply and our utility, we're not talking about the greater area or the community. There are issues that are outside the city limits and outside of our water service territory that are different than our water utility. But tonight, as we talk about this, it's all about our water utility service area. So what you see on the screen right now is our water service territory. And it's a map that we're updating right now. It's our CCN, or Certificate of Convenience and Necessity map, that we're in the middle of updating right now with the Public Utility Commission. And you can see that it includes most of the city limits, but not all. There's some areas up, for example, Shoreline Park is not in our water service territory. Overlook at Boerne and Durango subdivision, not. Spencer Ranch is not. Bluffview Apartments is not. Those are actually all being served, even inside the city limits, by Texas Water Corporation. So that was an agreement made between the city and the landowner at the time that they decided to annex, and that was what their municipal service plan said. And of course, anybody that buys in there is buying into that area that was annexed and developed by the owner or developer. So the reason for that, majority of it, in that northwest quadrant, which is west of I-10 and north of 46, if you will, Texas Water has the right of first refusal. So we've agreed with that. That was their main area of focus. In our ETJ, they have the right of first refusal. We have the right of first refusal in the city limits, of course, and then in the ETJ in the other three quadrants. There's also a technical issue in that we can only serve up to a certain elevation with our pipelines, and many of these areas are hilltops that are too high for our main service plane to serve. We can't pressurize them to the TCEQ minimums on a reliable basis, and the system from Texas Water is set up differently, and they can. So the developers chose to go with that water utility, even inside the city limits, in lieu of expanding our utility and paying the cost for that. There's also two areas outside the city limits, Kendall County Water Control and Improvement District number 2 and Kendall County Water Control and Improvement District number 4. That's known as Esperanza and George's Ranch, that are in our service territory, and that was done by council. As you may be aware, since the 1950s, we've had a policy in place where we do not serve outside the city limits unless it's deemed beneficial by the council, and those agreements are the reason that we serve that area. But the community perception is Boerne doesn't have enough water, and that is probably based on two issues. Number one, there are people who only have private wells outside the city limits, and even a couple inside the city limits. And they have restrictions. Sometimes during drought, water is not as available. That often happens when it's in the heat of summer. You hear about that. There is a potential for rainwater catchment at those places, but it's very expensive and hard to treat and all those kind of things. And so it's generally thought that they really only have one supply. Kind of would argue with that, but that's a different discussion. Talked about the areas we serve and how much we've grown. So the service territory is larger. The service population, service population and service territory is larger than the city limits, because we do serve those large areas outside the city limits. So when I talk about us serving 25,000 people, I'm not talking about the population of Boerne, I'm talking about the water service territory. And you can see from the table, in the last 10 years, we've grown from a service population on potable water from 13,000 to about 25,000. And in that same time, we've grown from 0 reclaimed water meters to 3,226. So the percentage of people with reclaimed water is increasing, and that's because we've got a new reclaimed water system in the eastern part of town. I'll talk more about that in a minute. That is our main conservation advantage. So why is reclaimed water important? Because the basic human needs, the potable water human needs, are the same for every one of those houses, but they don't contribute to the summertime peak, the irrigation peak at all, either through their yards or their right-of-way irrigation. They basically just use, in general, the same amount of water that you and I might use, but no lawn irrigation, even if they have a lawn. In 2024, our service population grew 6.8%, but because of the way that the demand occurred over the summer with some rain during the middle of the summer, the demand growth, in other words, the amount of water that we served, was only 0.6% more than the prior year. Now, the prior year was really hot and dry. Last year we got some rain, so that's kind of why that interaction happened. And to that end, you've seen this graph before. I'll speak to it briefly. The base flow, or the dark purple area you see on the bottom, that's the amount of water that's really for basic human needs: cooking, cleaning, bathing at your home, as well as restaurants, schools, commercial establishments, things like that. That's the amount of water that we would expect to serve every day, even without irrigation. The multicolored blue, green, and light purple are the peaks that occur primarily during the hotter months. The black line that you see superimposed on that is the prior year, so you can just kind of compare the 2023 year to 2024. The difference between those years, if you'll remember, in 23 we kind of had a wet spring, so we didn't have much demand, but we had a brutal summer. Record heat, drought continued, and so the peaks were really high. Last year, we didn't have that wet spring. We saw some irrigation use, but in July, we had some significant rain that really kind of kept us from having that major peak that we're used to seeing. And that's why our total water use was a little lower last year. Community perception, however, is that we don't have enough water. Number one, because you read it a lot, and that has to do with not just our utility, but the comments that you hear from outside our utility. And also, you hear a lot of comments about, if we have enough water, why do we have to be on restrictions? And the answer to that is simple. When you are in a drought, especially prolonged drought, then not only can the supply be limited, curtailment from the Groundwater Conservation District, maybe even GBRA, surface water rights, TCEQ curtailments, so you get limitations on the water that are available because it's not raining, but you have demand increases that are exponential because it's not raining. And lots of folks want to put water on the landscaping. So it's kind of a double whammy. The way that we try to mitigate those peak demands that are so hard to meet is through restrictions that are important. However, it is also important because we have a system that's sized for firefighting capability that we keep flow through the system. So one might say, why aren't we on stage 3 restrictions all the time? Why aren't we even on greater restrictions and don't allow irrigation? The bottom line is because we are primarily a surface water city. There are disinfection byproducts that are inherent in treated surface water, and you got to keep it fresh. And so there needs to be some flow through these oversized tanks and lines that are sized for firefighting and future development in order to keep that water fresh. Last summer, we under-pumped and got into a situation where we let the DBP concentration get too high. It was a double whammy. It was kind of a perfect storm. Not only did the water, not only did we not serve a lot in the middle of the summer. The summertime is when the DBP concentrations are inherently higher. So had less use, surface water. That's why you're seeing the public notices that go out and probably will, or are right now. But as our average DBP concentrations are back where they're supposed to be. A little bit more statistics. Last year we served 72% surface water, 15% groundwater, and 13% reclaimed water. So if you look at that reclaimed water, it's almost up there with groundwater. It's significant. That equates to 2,607 acre-feet of surface water, 532 acre-feet of groundwater, and 480 acre-feet of reclaimed water. An acre-foot is hard for people to visualize. So if you want to think about how much water 480 acre-feet is, it's equivalent to 156 million gallons. So that reclaimed water, if you want to look at it this way, we use reclaimed water instead of potable water for 156 million gallons. It's a huge conservation measure. And because of that and our restrictions and our conservation measures, we have seen our average per capita consumption go down. Since 2017, from 2017 to 2024, it's down from 162 gallons per potable. It's down from 162 to 115 gallons per person per day. Reclaimed for that same period is holding pretty steady between 13 and 18 gallons per person per day. Now, we don't serve everybody with reclaimed water, but that average is averaged over the entire population. So it seems low, but it's actually, for those that are using it, it's a higher percentage. So what that means is our total water usage per capita is 18 plus 115 or 133, if I'm doing my math correctly, gallons per person per day, which is good. It's good for the industry average. Metroplex is pushing 200 in some areas. San Antonio 120 to 140. We do well, especially on the potable water side. Now, also important to understand that those numbers include those non-single family residential consumptions. So that's the total water use measured, averaged over the population, but it includes school usage and restaurant usage and all of the commercial usage. So we estimate that about 25% of the water we produce is used for outside of non-single family homes. So that kind of just gives you a feel for the facts. But what I take from this graph is our conservation efforts are working. Last year, the council implemented some water conservation incentives, and these are the number of people that have taken advantage of it. So we have our year-round conservation efforts that disallow irrigation of lawns and landscape during the heat of the day. When it's windy and there's more evaporation, we require that you water in the cooler hours overnight or early morning, late evening. In times of drought, then we can further limit that through restrictions to 1 day a week, 2 days a week, maybe an old one, but we can reduce the number of days and even the hours as applicable to try to meet those demands and as compared to our supply. Other conservation initiatives, as shown here, we had 10 people take advantage of the rainwater harvesting rebate. We had 47 people take advantage of the irrigation system consultation and 9 for the irrigation rain-freeze sensors. Now, for me, I think that the most beneficial item on this list is the irrigation system consultation. It's to pay somebody to come out and tell you how to optimize the irrigation of your lawn, and that really should reduce the amount of water that you have to put on a lawn to keep it the way you want to keep it. Keeps they look for sprinklers that are spraying in the street. They look for timers that are set wrong. All of them maybe broken heads. So those kind of things really, I think, do pay off, and I'm glad that more people are taking advantage of that one. One thing I wanted to mention is that we have a water dashboard, as you are aware. We created that a couple of years ago, and it's right now under a substantial redo. We have a consultant that is doing that for us. They're actually doing it for free as a model that they want to provide for other communities. We may have to pay for maintenance, but the update is they're doing pro bono, and we will roll that out very soon. It's a much I think it looks a lot better, and it's easier to use and very user friendly. Drought. I'll touch on this briefly. Every week, the drought monitor for our area, for every area, is updated. We are still in a drought. Boerne is still in the extreme drought category. A couple of years ago, that dark red exceptional drought was bullseyed over us. Now it's a little south of us, but we're still in a drought. Make no mistake. On the right, what you see on the right is another thing you don't see as often is kind of it's the historic wet versus dry years, and you can see it kind of comes in cycles. Historically, it has. You go through a period of wet or flooding where we kind of forget what it's like to not have enough water, because there's plenty of water both flowing on the ground and in the creeks and falling on your lawns. And then we go through a period of drought where we kind of forget that it floods and we worry about how much water supply we have. We are right now in the middle of a prolonged drought where we did have one wet year in 2022, and it was a good year, very helpful, but we're in the middle of a prolonged drought. There was another big one from 2010 to 2015, broken by the Memorial Day floods, if you'll remember that one. So those kind of things, that cyclical wet, dry season, that happens in our area. It's never average. There is no normal.
Mike, just
Yes,
a
sir.
comment question. I think I read something that the Texas Water Board has said they're assuming this is the drought of record.
I would not doubt it. I have seen some climatological data, and you can argue it both ways, but the bottom line is it's been very, very dry for about the same number of years as the drought of the 50s, although we're not seeing the groundwater levels as low as they have been in the past yet. So, effects of the drought. Boerne City Lake. Last time it was full was 2022, and it has dropped pretty much steadily since then. We did see an all-time low. It's full at 42 feet above the floor. So at the service spillway, it's 42 feet deep. Last October, it got down to 28.75 feet. That's the lowest we've seen it. But it is still, let's see, right, its current level is a little over 29 feet. Now it's come up just a little 6 inches since the low in the fall. But right now, depending on how you look at it, it's either 56% full as an optimist or 44% empty as a pessimist. But what is encouraging to me, as following this stuff and knowing how things work, is that we are in the middle of this prolonged drought and we still have half of the lake available. Now, we can only, by permit, withdraw 833 acre feet per year. That's how much we are. The water actually belongs to the state of Texas and they permit withdrawal. That's the same number that we've had since the lake was built in the 70s. And we typically use as much of that as we can, again, to minimize the use of groundwater. But we can't take any more than 833 acre feet. Most of the drawdown in the summertime is evaporation, not consumption through the plant. The reason it came back up is just that evaporation in the wintertime is low, and there's still a little bit of flow, be it from small rains or springs, that is refilling and outpacing evaporation and withdrawal. Similarly, Canyon Lake, our other big supply, last full in 2021, currently 48% full or 52% empty. GBRA, so the GBRA conservation plan tracks, and they set their stages of drought restrictions based on level of the lake. And summer or fall, it passed the 880 feet mean sea level elevation. I don't know how many feet of water is in the lake, but they do their stages based on mean sea level elevation. Past that 880 acre feet, and it's still dropping slightly, but it's below that number. So they have implemented stage 4 restrictions. That includes mandatory curtailments from maximum withdrawal amounts. City of Boerne is not taking its maximum commitment. Our maximum commitment is 3,611 acre feet. We're taking 59% of that. And so because we're under 85% or the curtailment of 15%, their curtailments at this point don't affect us and don't affect the amount of water that they deliver. If they go to stage 5, I think the curtailment amount is 40%, but again, we're still under 60. So if we were at 70%, they might curtail us down to 60. We're at 59. So still not taking as much as we could. We've done several water studies over the years, going back to the last one I could find was the earliest one I could find was 1995, and up until 2022. I'm not going to belabor these points because you've seen these presentations. But suffice it to say, I hope that we generally have enough water to serve between 45 and 50, maybe a little bit more population, service population, not city population. But that assumes that we have a reasonable use of water. Conservation is important. If people start to really consume a lot more, demand a lot more on average, then the water supplies won't last that long. We have done some growth projections and also consumption projections. And what you see here on this chart are two scenarios. We expect to get 900 more acre feet from GBRA, and all indications are still that we will get it in 2037. If we get that water supply, which we expect, and we have the peaking capability on top of it, if we go into the high growth, high water use, which we would not expect to do, we have water to the time of 2050. If we go low growth and low water use, it's 2070. Low growth and high water use, still 2070. But somewhere between 2060, 2070, we feel comfortable that we have enough water till then.
Question, in your
Yes, sir.
modeling, how did you use reclaimed water as part of this calculation. Did you model expansion of that system?
Yes, in such that we reduced the per capita consumption. That's the low water use. So if low water use as per capita consumption drops, which means we're serving more out of reclaimed. Without reclaimed water, we would already be short right now.
Sure.
But without reclaimed water, we wouldn't be serving some of the areas we're serving too. So it's a marriage. So there's several subdivisions that are developments, if you will, or subdivisions that are in progress, be it Esperanza, George's Ranch, Regent Park, South Glen. South Glen's about built out. Areas we serve that are in progress. And when those are built out, we expect our service population to be, with the addition of what's here now, in those places, 37,549 exactly. No, that's an estimate. I should have used a rounder number. But we have to remember that there are still some underdeveloped or undeveloped areas in the city limits, and there may be some areas that we want to serve where there may be an advantage. Perhaps we get some road right-of-way that we need or a park that we need, and so the council needs to have the ability to either annex and bring somebody into our territory or maybe even serve outside if it's advantageous to the city, if the council feels it that way. But just to try to put that in scale, please don't look at the specific parcels on here. If one of yours is purple and you don't think it'll ever develop more, I didn't put this up here for sake of argument. I had our GIS guy say, look at the map and say, where do we think we could grow? Where could we redevelop or what's vacant? And if you look at the purple areas on this map, that's supposed to be a schematic representation of that total area. But it comes up to 1,300 to maybe 1,500 acres. I can almost guarantee you that some of the purple area will not develop and some of the area that's not purple will. Maybe some of these holes will develop someday, even those that will never develop. You know, when I started here in 2020, I was told this area out here will never develop. And so maybe it will, maybe it won't. But we do have enough water to serve what we're committed to right now. And it's in our power, in your power, to make sure that we don't over-allocate. That's your prerogative because of the policies that we have in place, not serving outside the city limits or where council deems it beneficial. We're not over-allocated at this point. We have enough water for the population we see coming in the service territory, including those areas that are still developing, as long as we're judicious with the water we use. Now, full disclosure, Texas Water Development Board is in the middle of their update for 2025. And what they are going to show is the state demographer's assumption that Boerne will be 75 to 80,000 people by 2070. We don't agree, but we control that, right? You control that by the areas you annex. Could the area around us develop? Yes, it could, and we could get to that number. The problem that we're going to see in that plan is that they are, by the plan, assigning every bit of that growth to the City of Boerne water utility, which we argued, but they need to show that the region will be low on water, and that's just their methodology. And it will be. You know, there are areas that we don't serve that are going to struggle with water. That's true, just not our utility. So you could see that if you read the Texas Water Development Board that we're out of water by 2060, not 2070. We don't believe that, but again, that's the difference in the numbers. And that's really all I have. I do want to address the one thing one question that came up that I didn't hear addressed or that I don't think we addressed through the comments is fluoride. There is fluoride in our water, but it's naturally occurring. We don't add any. So there is some that if you read the Consumer Confidence Report, you may see fluoride. It's naturally occurring. We do not add fluoride. It's a national issue right now. Some people just really think it should not be in there.
Councilman Scott?
One more question, and that was related to, the Texas, the governor's been talking about water, that they've set aside some super funds to talk about water and water development. Do we, from a utility standpoint, do you have any asks of like what you need, what you feel we should be looking for? I mean, should we be looking for outside water sources? Should we be looking to tag on to any of these outside pipelines that are coming from east to west? I mean, if we're going to develop some additional water resources, it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a long time. and we kind of need to be planning for it. So do you have a wish list to provide a roadmap for 2070, 2050? I mean,
That is always the key question, right? And so really it comes down to the policies that we want to implement. If we want to grow and we want to allocate water resources beyond what our capabilities are, then we need another supply. And if we don't grow beyond our current borders and beyond what we're currently allocated to, that we already plan to supply, then we don't need more water. The issue with more water is it's going to be astronomically expensive. So just to put it in scale, between our own lake and our own surface water, it costs about $1.50 a thousand to produce that water. And GBRA's water, we buy at about $3 per thousand, so that seems like double the price, right? Very expensive water. The next supply that's coming regionally could be as high as $15 per thousand, or 5 times the cost. And if we choose to participate in the growth through our utility, we will need to acquire some of that very expensive water. Or do we pull back within the walls and serve just the city limits with our water that we already have allocated? That's a policy decision.
And
we're
at
in
the same
control.
time, grow our reclaim system
Right.
to further expand the resources we have.
Now, regional supply will be very expensive. I've talked to GBRA about Superfund, and the Superfund is a drop in the bucket with regard to covering all the costs for the projects. It's not enough. So it will be expensive. For those that take that water and distribute it, their customers will likely pay. I believe personally that by 2040, 2050, water is going to be too expensive to put on landscape, and that will inherently bring down the per capita consumption. If you imagine that your water bill goes up 5 times because the water supply costs 5 times as much, your $20 water bill goes to $100, or your $100 water bill goes to $500. That in today's dollars. And so that may make it too expensive to water grass with, which extends our supply because those peaks don't occur. You know, what will be the difference? I don't have a crystal ball. But we have some policy decisions to make.
on top of that, future growth is going to use less water. I think, as we expand the reclaimed water, all the subdivisions that don't have access to it probably never going to get it. But if we make the investment to expand the reclaimed water system now into areas that aren't served by it, we can ensure future growth in that system, pending, obviously its availability. But anyway, I think it's one of our largest benefits that we could do would be expand that system, because right now we have areas of the city that just are not served by it at all. Entire neighborhoods that can't, and we probably will never service an existing neighborhood. But beyond that, there is potential growth in holes within the city that could be serviced by reclaimed water upon its availability. Just even our own parks on our, on the peripheral and northern side of the city. Anyway, just expanding that would be super beneficial. I think we've all talked about certain aspects of that. It's just more of a timing thing. And anyway,
Sure, it is timing because we also have to have the supply, which means sewer treatment, right? And when we transfer flow from the old to the new, there's a capital cost with that, but it will make more water available. There is a limit to how much sewer capacity we have in town, and we put it at about 50,000 people before we have to develop new plants, more than we have now.
Just piggybacking on what Quentin said, just as the state decides to allocate money or not, $1 billion a year for 10 years is the word. To your point, that's not nearly enough for the larger scheme, but as we staff or a future council can try to get some of that money to help with these projects, I think that money will be there.
We are in a very good position. As we talk to GBRA about this, I forget what it's called now, Water Secure is the project they're talking about that will be $12 to $15 a thousand estimates. There are utilities, including utilities that serve around us, that are clamoring for as much of that water as they can get. We are in the unique position of not needing it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So do we pay into that project that others need now but we don't need for decades? Those are, again, policy decisions.
couple of questions or thoughts. As far as the expansion outside the city, it's important to remind that Esperanza brought an agreement for, I think, 1,200 acre-feet of water from Canyon Lake, which the city did not have. Am I correct?
That is correct.
So
And that's,
that added to our capacity significantly. So they actually brought something to the table.
so they brought, I could throw out some numbers, but it might get confusing. Bottom line is they brought more water than they needed, especially because they built the reclaim system that reduces the total amount that they use. So it was, from a water supply standpoint, a very beneficial
The other thing
surface expansion.
The other thing I hear a lot is that we don't follow the rules. I know our groundwater follows Cow Creek's Stage 4 rules.
Yes, sir.
And I know that we also follow, as you pointed out, GBRA's Stage 4 rules.
Yes, sir.
So we are following the rules, despite what some try to say. So we are doing that. I would also mention a couple of things. The Hill Country Alliance just put out, I just sent it to Ben today, their program for homeowner associations to try to encourage HOAs to begin the process of transitioning their existing residents to a more water-friendly situation. As part of that, when you look at our conservation efforts, one thing that came to me recently, and Ben, you were part of that, is that although we are providing service for reclaimed water in terms of rain catchment, that only works if it rains.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't rain, you don't get any catchment. What I came to understand recently is that HVAC recapture, AC condensate recapture, which people are running 9 or 10 months out of the year, is enormous. Mm-hmm. And if it's a commercial enterprise, it's beyond belief. It's thousands of gallons a month. If it's a local enterprise in your home, it can be as much as 20 or 30 gallons a day, depending on how big your home is or how long you run your unit. So I would like to see us add some kind of consultation for that. Now, obviously, these systems, I've priced them. They can be as low as $1,000 or $2,000. They can be as much as $10,000 or $20,000. That's not something we're going to pay for, but perhaps we could provide some consultation in that regard, because the benefit of that versus rain catchment is dramatically greater. I'm not talking against rain catchment. I'm just saying it only works if it rains. So this stuff works because everybody's using air conditioning,
Sure.
including the city. So, I mean, it's something we should all look at.
Yep. There is a logistics problem with using captured rainwater, and that's that you have to pressurize it. But that, again, if you don't have water and that's your only water, you're willing to do it.
I'll also add, Mike showed it on a graph, but we're using the same amount of groundwater we were using 20 years ago. Roughly, pretty similar there.
Well, also one more thing. When you mentioned that the $15 price for new water, that's the price to actually have the water. The price to participate in having access to the water is astronomical for the city. So I mean, you have to pay to play. So for us to even get the $15 per use water, per gallon water, we got to pay millions of dollars to participate. And that's a capital improvement that, to your point, unless we're going to expand dramatically. As far as the Texas Water Board, the state does not have a chance. I mean, one desalinization plant, which is going to be fought. I mean, I've already talked to people down in the Corpus Christi area. They're going to fight it. People on Mustang Island, Padre Island, they're going to fight it because of the issue with discharge. So the Texas situation is going to be not that easy to do, to grab new water.
Very
so
difficult.
We're going to have to be very prudent in how we create our situation. However, one other thing, our responsibility is to provide water to the citizens of Boerne. Not everybody who lives in Boerne. That's our responsibility as a utility board and as elected officials. We cannot be the regional water provider for 78006 and all the zip codes. We just don't have the resources for that. And that's something that the public has to understand. Now, whether SAWS wants to, I mean, I'm talking about, there are laws I know, but I mean, SAWS or Texas Water, that's their decision. But we cannot be the regional provider for water in this area. We just don't have the resources for it.
Unless we choose to buy some very, very expensive.
Unless we choose to buy very expensive water.
Yes.
And that would only make sense if we're going to annex, and if people want to be annexed and live by city rules. The only advantage for us doing that would be to implement our UDC restrictions on development, which a lot of people don't like. That's fine. But there's no real advantage for us to do that.
The difficulty of it all is that we have some well thought out rules for water use and all of the other rules. The difficulty comes in enforcing them on a case by case basis, a customer by customer basis. And so, but if you don't, you never get to your goal. So anyway.
Just to help the public understand, so the reclaimed water, is that pushed through to become potable water, or is that used for a different purpose at all times?
So in 2017, we did a study about what local supplies we could develop here, not buying from regional, but what local possibilities there are. And there's aquifer storage recovery. There's deeper desalinization of deeper groundwater that contains salt. There's more storage in reservoirs, and there's direct and indirect potable reuse as a potable supply in that study.
So
that is possible.
I'm talking about our purple pipe.
So the purple pipe is non-potable, and it's made for irrigation. If we ever get into a situation where we want to use direct or indirect reuse, then that water would need to be treated even further to get it to drinking water standards. But the more we can use for irrigation, again, the more we reduce that total amount. And so having the purple pipe non-potable reclaim systems will benefit either way.
Is there a plan or a thought of taking that non-potable water and eventually pushing it up to the San Antonio treatment, water treatment, to be fully treated?
So
if it was necessary to do so, would that cost less money than having to tap into what Mr. Scott was talking about?
Building another treatment plant and treating effluent would be cheaper than a regional supply, more than likely. It would probably be a new plant that has different capabilities because we'd be treating different water than Boerne City Lake water. So it would need to be a different plant with different design. And it would be expensive, but not nearly as expensive as a regional supply, more than likely.
And
as an ick factor to it.
Thank you. And for future council purposes, say the city does in 10 or 20 years, as let's say we do remain in some type of exceptional drought, and the lake goes down, it becomes like Medina Lake, both Boerne Lake and Canyon Lake. And as future councils, let's say they do annex other areas and they are required to provide water, would it be prudent to create or look at creating some type of city super fund of financially planning for that? And then as the city gets built out, if that happens, as neighborhoods are built or whatnot, require developers to pay into such a thing? I'm not talking about right now, but I'm talking about in the future, for thinking, future forward.
So how that fund could be funded is probably more of a legal question than an operational one. Can we? It sounds like an impact fee, but that's very strictly regulated.
Or do we need to change our impact fee structure based on that?
Well, we would need to include projects that need to be built within the next 10 years to charge those fees. Okay. So it can be done. The only other option is to charge our customers more money to build a fund. And so, in the last rate increase we did, we got some resistance and water right now is really cheap compared to what it's going to be in the future.
And I ask that because I agree. I don't think it's fair to charge our customers more money. I think that if it's being brought on by future development, that cost be shared by the people bringing the development. I mean, of course, obviously, you know how I feel about, I would rather see lower impact development if we have any in the future, but neither here nor there. I have to be realistic about what may come in the future when I'm not here.
So again, we're not over allocated right now. The development that is planned and in our service territory right now will not drive more supply, the need for more supply. Unless the lakes dry up, is that a possibility? Yes. Probability, no.
And I'm trying to be realistic because I understand that other suppliers, such as Texas Water Company, they're the ones indebted to people outside, especially in elevated areas. But I mean, what happens if that aquifer has issues with being able to provide water, and that's our, I think you said 15% right now, but what if we need to lean into that in the future and we're not able to? So that's where my thoughts are coming from.
Sure, they're valid thoughts. I wish we all had the crystal ball. It's a tough situation. Texas population is forecast to outgrow California's within the next few decades. It's a state problem, not a Boerne problem. The question is, what is our part of it as a utility?
Just one thing I wanted to add. You and I have talked about this. I've been beating the drum for purple pipe up above Kendall Inn to make sure we have flow in the Cibolo. But as you and I talked about, that could be done, and that's an capital expense to do that. But then there's another capital expense, because even if you're using gray water, it's chlorinated. And to put it back in the creek, you have to build a dechlorination facility above Kendall Inn to put it back into the creek. So everything we do about water is expense, is a capital expense. There is no free water. It's that simple. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add that if it is the crystal ball is the worst case, doomsday, Canyon Lake goes dry, the state will have to step in big time. And you're talking way more money than they're going to put in. And if that's the case, then, and we want the Texas miracle to continue, well, the state's going to have to spend a lot of money to bring water from somewhere, or the miracle is going to not work.
So I will tell you again, to put it in a local perspective, it is possible that we have a severe water shortage. It is possible. I would never say it's not. But we have, to use a cliche or a fairy tale reference, we've built a house of bricks. We are in good shape with water supply. And if that doomsday scenario happens, there's going to be a lot of folks hurting way before we are. And so presumably then there would be a regional plan that takes care of it. That's what we have to bank on. But we have done, prior councils and prior staffs have put us in a very good position, an enviable position compared to most of our neighbors.
But one thing, Sharon, to your point, whether it's growth or not, independent of any growth, if we do get to the point you're describing where there's issues with Boerne Lake or with Canyon Lake, that goes back to the issue of, do we pay to play in these more regional access to get piped water in, not to grow, but to supply our responsibilities to the citizens of Boerne. That's...
It could be $10 or $15 million a year when we don't need money.
Just to play, I know.
Just to play.
Well, and that's where my question came in.
We don't need water, sorry.
Do we pay to play first, or do we put the money first into another water treatment plant and then using what we have and, having to treat more?
From a total water
Not potable
volume
water.
and total cost standpoint, treating our own is going to be cheaper. But there are some public
And then
perception
when do we
problems to
start
overcome.
budgeting for that? Those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about.
Yes, ma'am. You're right.
Just one thing about public perception, because I've had conversations about this, and I remind people, what do you think they do on the space station? They don't have any. They don't have Boerne Lake. They don't have Canyon Lake. They don't have a pipeline. They recycle everything.
How many times is the water in the Mississippi River recycled and treated? So you can make the argument both ways, but you don't create water; it just changes form.
All right. Any questions from council? Thanks, Mike.
Yes, sir.
That's it, Mayor and Council. I appreciate it. I do want to thank Bessie Bronstein, who's our fill-in attorney on Zoom. Appreciate her being here.
Any other comments from council? Councilman Wilson?
Yeah, I thought tonight was another good example of the excellence of staff. We have an incredible library. I've said that a million times. I think excited to have new leadership, and obviously the prior leadership did an excellent job. Sarah's continuing the excellence of the finance department. Of course, it's cool to see that sort of shift from upper management in different departments, but still we continue the excellence. And Mike, as usual, such an informative presentation. I've learned so much from you on my time on council. I really, truly love that you're a part of this, and I appreciate everything I've learned.
All right, well, everybody enjoy the rest of your spring break. We are officially adjourned at 7:45 p.m.